Hello Zero Books readers. This video will examine the difference between an ideological critique and a materialist critique of capitalism by comparing some of the ideas in Alfie Bown's book Enjoying It to some of the ideas in my own novel Bash Revolution. The difference between an ideological critique of capitalism and a materialist one is not as simple as it might at first sound. The difficulty is this. Any serious materialist critique must include a critique of ideology as well. Here's why. If we hold with a strict, let's say, Newtonian or atomistic materialism, and attempt to explain our social reality in these terms, we create a situation that makes political change either impossible or purely mechanical. We risk reducing social reality to a series of causes and effects, and could very well end up believing that we are basically trapped in a predetermined chain of events. On the other hand, a strictly ideological approach to critique imagines that what we think is of the utmost importance. Our task becomes to understand the consequences of our ideas as they relate to other ideas, rather than to figure out how our practices change how we relate to each other and to the world. For example, in Alfie Bown's book Enjoying It, Candy Crush and Capitalism, Bown posited that games like Candy Crush serve an ideological function in the world, namely that they not only distract us from useful work, but also give us the impression that the work we're supposed to be doing is somehow more substantial and real than these games we use to distract us. It is only a comparison to Farmville or Bejeweled that the boring repetitive work of a mid-level computer programmer or a paper salesman at Dunder Mifflin can seem to be something other than completely trivial. In his book, Bown argues that, quote, "It is of political importance to realize that the enjoyment of video games like Candy Crush is anything but unproductive, and in fact should be seen as a particularly productive form of modern subjectivity. This is not meant in any positive way. Rather, we must see that there is an organized and organizing agenda behind the effects that these forms of apparently innocent enjoyment produce." What Alfie doesn't quite understand is that capitalist production is not merely ideological, in that it does not aim primarily at producing psychological states or forms of enjoyment, but is primarily aimed at producing value through commodities. In his book, Bown makes a number of useful observations about how these various Facebook games function within this economy, how they culturally reinforce or support the relationship at the center of capitalism, namely the class relation that sets up work. But what he leaves out is that the sort of work or production we experience as obvious and natural today is historical, even contingent, and that seeking to be productive in and of itself is not a bad thing. In fact, seizing and altering the mode of production, whether through the use of state power or by some other means, is the aim of any explicitly Marxist revolutionary project. In my novel Bash Revolution, I take up this idea that video games relate to the mode of production, but try to imagine a situation wherein these games wouldn't reinforce the capitalist mode, but instead replace it. The novel imagines that a computer hack implemented by a sentient AI could transform the mode of production and set up a new basis for society. The result, according to some critics, is decidedly dystopian. Becky Spratford, writing for Booklist, described the AI revolution in Bash Revolution this way, quote, "The world has become what the protagonist Matthew describes as a zombie movie, only with gamers in VR goggles as the undead." End quote. Here's a clip from a video short that's still in production and that's based on Bash Revolution.
I tried to stop her. I grabbed her arm and tried to get her attention, but she was just so into that game that she didn't even notice that I was there. And then 5 minutes later, she sat down at the kitchen table and tried to order herself a drink. Mom?
In the novel, I try to take on both the material and the ideological aspects of capitalist production and imagine what would be required in order to overcome both sides. The book takes on what would be required and, more significantly, what would be lost if we lived in a world where abstract labor, factory work, and consumer society were all replaced by Angry Birds or Pokemon Go. While the book is materialist, while it tries to imagine how the mode of production would be altered, it doesn't leave out the question of incentives or enjoyment. If playing video games became necessary for material survival, if a high score on Centipede was directly tied to where food and other resources would be distributed, what would entice people to keep playing? What could make the experience of living in a GameCube economy compelling, or even libidinally satisfying? For instance, I imagine a game written for Gen Xers, designed by Douglas Coupland, and created by the AI in order to bring the GameCube economy to non-gamers. I imagine something that wasn't really a game at all. Not even a story, but just a bunch of computer-generated content based on old media.
It's ironic that so many have forgotten the recent past, even as Hollywood directors and game developers only recycle what came before. We've forgotten history, even as we've become mired down in a nostalgic mode. And most of the games and other content out there get the details of the past totally wrong. The Retro Motel, on the other hand, remembers the 90s for you and remembers them accurately. Re-experience the Clinton years while meeting singles in your area. The Retro Motel is a social media platform and mud that lets you swap out your 21st century personality for a personality crisis. Lead a second life, a life before Y2K. Come stay in the Retro Motel.
In his book Enjoying It, Alfie Bown points out the dialectical structure of work in a capitalist society. He argued that video game distraction is the flip side of productive work. Bash Bash Revolution tells the story of how a one-dimensional world might arrive, a world wherein video game distraction is productive.
The flip side of enlightenment has been to sort of give up before the overpowering forces of technology in a more abject surrender than any that was ever called for in religion. I mean, to abjectly just to surrender before the powers of technology. And given the current state of the powers of technology, they far surpass the characteristics that we associate with God. I mean, think of it in this simple way. In the Bible, in the book of Revelations, the apocalypse is a magnificent myth, but long ago it became what in our society? A reality, a technologically achievable reality.
Oh, shit. My cereal's all soggy because I was watching my mom and Matt Damon.
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, you might click on that subscribe button. You might also consider supporting us on Patreon. We're now offering patrons access to select Zero Books titles and the opportunity to join in a monthly Zero Books Club discussion group online.